Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us for our 6th annual Encompass conference. We started this conference in 2017 in light of AIA National releasing a report that Gabrielle Bullock worked on, and it's been so important. And we encourage you all to introduce yourself in the chat box and to let us know how many of the 6 Encompasses you've attended. We'd like to know that as well. But my job today is to pay special honor and tribute to the sponsors who helped to make this program happen. AIA Los Angeles, we're very unique in that we sort of depend on the generosity of our community to support our programs and initiatives. And we are truly grateful for the 2022 Encompass sponsors, which include our presenting sponsor, ZGF, our community hosts, our HOK and Marmo Rabziner. Our friends of Encompass include Bester Architecture, Clark Construction, Ox Architecture, Lorcan or Hurley Architects, H.E.D., KFA Architecture, Co-Architects, NAC Architecture, and our participating sponsors include Page and Turnbull, HKS Architects, Woods Baggett, SAA Interiors and Architecture, Chu Gooding, AECOM, and GGA Plus Architecture. We're also here to sort of recognize and pay tribute to our annual sponsors that sort of help bring everything that we do for the year together. Our decarbonization sponsor is SoCal Edison. Our gold sponsors include Gruen Associates and ZGF. Our silver sponsors for the year include Cumming, Co-Architects, Lair Architects, Egan Simon, AC Martin, HED, SOM, and URW. And our bronze sponsors for the year include Rex Engineering Group, Bernard's, Collins & Collins LLP, KFA, Sharp Interior Systems, Matt Construction, McNicholas and McNicholas, Woods Baggett, Ascentech, and more Rubel Udell. And with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Craig Atkinson, who is the president of SoCal NOMA and also the director and California Public Practice Lead for Education, IBI Group. Craig Atkinson, welcome to the program and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Will, and welcome everybody to day 2 of the 6th annual Encompass conference. I think I started out the week knowing what I was going to go and what I was going to say, and I will tell you that events of the last 24 hours have changed my perspective. I will just say that I had a grandmother that grew up in Watts, and when I started to think about what I would talk to you guys about today and welcome you with, the first thing was that architecture at its core is supposed to elevate the human condition. So for me, I can go into the J, the E, the D, and the I, but I'm going to talk a little bit about equity, and because I think it ties in with the restorative justice theme of today. I think in all communities, especially in underrepresented communities, we need equity of access to healthcare, to play areas, to living, and those communities have been historically unequitable or inequitable. So, I think where we are today, and I think we'll hear some case studies today on projects that help piece by piece restore that equity to these communities and elevate those communities and elevate the human condition. So I look forward to a great day of case studies. I look forward to the future and for all of you adding elements to your toolbox to help improve these communities. And with that, Will, I'll send it back to you to start the program.
Thank you, Craig. Well, let's welcome Michael Anderson to the conversation with Stephen Lewis, Danny Bakewell, and Janelle Brooks Petty as the moderator. Thank you.
Who goes first?
Good morning.
Sorry, Janelle.
Oh, no worries at all. So it's really just my responsibility to let everyone who doesn't know a little bit about our panelists for today. I'm actually really excited about this conversation. The wealth of knowledge that each of them brings to the table, I think, is pretty amazing, and the things that they are doing and have accomplished just wonderful. And as we're looking at restorative justice, we can take the information and the angle that each one gives, and hopefully we're learning and looking at possible solutions and how we can be part of restoring equity in the built environment. So first, I want to introduce Danny Bakewell Jr. He is the executive editor and chief of staff for the Los Angeles Sentinel. I think that is one of many hats that that Danny wears, and the things that he does are so dynamic and exciting for me to see and know a bit about. He leads the real estate development and management division of the Bakewell Company. That's one of the nation's largest and most successful privately held African-American real estate development companies. The family has built, owns, and manages over 4 million square feet of commercial, office, industrial, and residential real estate throughout California alone. He serves as executive editor and chief of staff for Bakewell Media. They also, Bakewell Media owns the Sentinel, the LA Watts Times, previously owned WBOK Radio in New Orleans, and also presents the annual Taste of Soul, which hosts a few 100,000 people in my neighborhood of Leimert Park, which is a pretty dynamic festival. Danny is also a licensed general contractor in the state of California and sees day-to-day operations for the Bakewell Development, Bakewell Construction, Bakewell Construction Management, and Bakewell Media. So welcome, Danny.
Hey, thank you, Janelle.
Okay, next we have Michael Anderson, who is very active in the AIA community and NOMA communities, founder and principal of Anderson Barker Architects, architecture firm and economic development firm in Los Angeles, over 35 years of experience in transit communities, aviation, education, civic, commercial, residential, and municipal infrastructure projects, and an author with a book that has recently come out, and I hope that there are some notes that he will share regarding that. And finally, I want to introduce our host for this discussion, our Stephen Lewis, principal at ZGF, an advocate for social justice and diversity within the field of architecture. And also want to note that he is currently serving as a president of the Architects Foundation. That's AIA's philanthropic partner, and an all around really nice and knowledgeable guy. So I'm passing the mic to Stephen to continue the conversation that started bubbling this morning.
Thank you, Janelle. And can everyone hear? Because I know we no longer have control, so we're just depending on everybody to get this technology right. So good morning, and what a time to be having this conversation, and these conversations which have always happened and been ongoing, but with an audience whose ears are hearing this stuff differently. And I think I heard George Floyd, may he rest in peace, referred to as a saint recently, because to elevate him in recognition of that pivotal moment when his life passed, and we, people of color, magically materialized in the real world, who have been hidden in plain sight for many. This gives us some territory to work in right now. We are conditioned to expect that this will come to an end, that the interest will wane, the power it be will remain the power it be, but we also have this opportunity right now, as long as this huge tuna that we've hooked is swimming toward the boat, to reel it in as much as we can while it's on that trajectory, and make as much progress as we can. And it's great to be able to have Michael and Danny in this conversation. And I'll say right up front, we don't all have to agree about all of this stuff and everything, because we're all pushing this rock uphill in the same basic direction. We might be doing it in some different ways. We might have different facets of the gem that, when looked at in totality, really provide you as an audience with some perspective on what's not only possible in front of us, but what is being grabbed and executed in front of us right now. And so each of us is doing that work in different ways. I want to get it started by putting out a statement that I'd like both of you to respond to in terms of how this may or may not inform your approach to the work you're doing. If you stand with residents of historically marginalized or Black communities who are in the path of development and redevelopment, not necessarily on their own terms, and you say with them, nothing about us without us is for us. First, do you subscribe to that axiom? And if so, how do you each chart that course to empower people whose lives will be affected by the work that each of you will do in a way that is beneficial to individuals, but to the collective? And let me start that off with you, Danny.
Well, first and foremost, I absolutely agree with your saying and what we're talking about. I think that as a developer, as a community, with so much conversation going on about inclusivity, about the new buzzwords of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DE&I as they call it, and everything else, is that whatever we're doing, it has to be intentional. And when I say it has to be intentional, I mean, it can't be business as usual. You can't say we want to hire African-American architectural firms, contractors, and people like that, and businesses like that, but you still have the exact same standards that were created to exclude us out of the process. So if you're really serious about that, about being inclusive, you have to now create a formula that allows you to be included. I'll use as a quick example, at one time I had been asked to participate in a major, do community outreach and everything for a major infrastructure improvement here along Crenshaw. And the whole conversation came about a painting contract. And basically I said, well, look, I can find you African-American painters, but you're saying that this is, you got 5 locations and it's a $10 million painting contract. I don't know that I can find you one African-American painting contractor who can bond for $10 million. So I said, but if you're willing to break this up into 5 separate contracts, I can find you an African-American painter who has the capacity to bond for $2 million. And this general contractor wasn't willing to do that. They just said, oh, no, that we don't really want to do that. That's not what we do. We wrote this up to be a $10 million contract and we only want to hire one. So therefore, their commitment to really being inclusionary, their commitment to really wanting to see an opportunity come about was erroneous. And so ultimately I said, well, look, I can't really help you. I don't want to put my name on this because at the end of the day, they're going to be looking at me and I couldn't deliver for my community. So I say that to say, if you're really serious about it, you've got to be willing to rewrite the playbook so that it allows us to be included. Because the truth is the playbook was written for us not to be included.
Very, very good point, Danny. Very good point. I appreciate that. Nothing about us without us is for us, Michael.
So I'm just going to extend on what Danny said. We have to design and make solutions that are possible for this and past generation of Black and brown people to participate in a way that's effective. When I hear of equity, to me, equity is capital. Equity is having a capital source that helps you move forward. Just like when you make an investment into a company or a business plan, you get somebody to put up equity if you're going to develop a project so that you can move forward and get the capital necessary to do the whole deal. So for me, and working in the Crenshaw community, seeing how it loses out, is to give a first-time buyer equity or a subsidy where they can purchase a home plus 3 income properties. basically giving them a fourplex where they have a house and also aid in solving our housing needs in Black and brown communities so that Black and brown people, to reverse the damage caused by redlining, are made possible to afford a $1.6 to $2 million fourplex because the government gives them about $500,000 that makes it possible for them to put as little as $30,000 or $40,000 down. That is a solution that will allow them to be in the community in a way that also will replenish the culture of the community, that also raises the average household income within our communities. And then also another concept we're looking at is for what I call remodeling mom's house into an elegant courtyard fourplex, where she would get $100,000 to $200,000. And then the kids and grandkids could live in a brand new 3-bedroom unit in the back. And then this way you start to make a village quality of life. Have the kids live in the community where their parents were born and grew up. But also strategically, you're raising the average household income per lot. And that's something that is looked at. How do you get retail, increase in quality of retail, such as Trader Joe's and Starbucks? You know, when I did these studies for the AIALA XTOD, we heard the community say back then, we want a Trader Joe's, right? In the 90s, when I did the studies for CRA, they were like, we want a Starbucks. But what they're really saying is we want the quality of life that we see Trader Joe's and Starbucks in. And the way that you make that happen is you increase the average household income per lot, right? That's, you know, just gentrification through Black and brown people, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, let me just say that there's a lot of detail in your formula, which I want to encourage the audience to get a copy of Michael's new book called Urban Magic, where he goes into great detail outlining this process, the outcomes that are possible by following this sort of playbook that he's written. I do think that it is, it's an ideal kind of vision. And as we well know, like any community, there's not a monolithic set of values and thought processes. And so to blanket overlay that idea into a neighborhood would take considerable skill in facilitating understandings and building consensus, right, in order for that to happen. So since Danny is on that implementation side, from the developer side, has done this housing and commercial and retail development, how do you, Danny, take this very idyllic concept that Michael's, you know, brilliantly laid out, which if you do the math on it, it actually works. Nobody loses in that formula. How do you begin to turn the knobs and the wheels of what you referred to, I would say, as structural inequality, to be able to unpack that and reconstruct it?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have been able to do as a development company is to kind of get rid of the smoke screen. And, you know, I have a project in Northwest Pasadena, which is the African-American part of Pasadena. And they, for years, were told that they couldn't get a grocery store, they couldn't get a Starbucks, they couldn't get all of the basic necessities that the community needed. We developed a center. We brought, at the time, a bonds in. It required us to kind of convince bonds to rework their floor plan to make it work. We brought a Starbucks in thanks to Magic Johnson and Ken Lombard when they were doing deals. You know, they wanted a sit-down restaurant. We brought in a Blaze Pizza. They wanted a bank, and Chase Bank we ultimately were able to bring in. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to, you know, these businesses, they're looking for customers. And if you can operate a quality development and deliver it on time, in budget, with all of those things, and have a developer who has the resources. All of these buildings that I'm talking about were designed by Jenkins Gales Martinez, which is an African-American architectural firm that I think you guys are familiar with. In many cases, the other tenant, the smaller tenants in the shop were local businesses, African-American businesses, women-owned businesses. But I also want to say one thing, and I want to just kind of chime on one other thing that Michael talked about. We as a community have to see past some of the smokescreen rhetoric, I'm going to call it, and get to the real detail. And I've asked banks this since the George Floyd tragedy that you spoke of, is that all of a sudden when the reality of DE&Y and George Floyd came about, every bank started coming up and talking about these millions, if not billions of dollars that they were committing to invest in the Black community. But my question becomes, what's in it for Black people? So did you change the credit requirements? Did you change the interest rate? Do Black people get a better interest rate than the normal interest rate that you're offering? Look, I've had to do loans that are in excess of $50 million. My projects in Compton, Pasadena, other places like that, I know what it takes to get that. I got leases from national credit tenants. They didn't lower the requirements. The requirements I met were for the same shopping center in Compton as a shopping center in Beverly Hills. So the point is, what's in it for Black folks? All of these banks and all of these people are telling you that they're gonna invest all this money, but what do we get? What are we actually getting? If you still have to have a 750 FICO score or better, if the interest rate is gonna be the same that everybody else is getting, what are we getting? You were supposed to be doing that a long time ago. This is not something that you're now living up to basically the federal standard, because redlining was supposed to have stopped a long time ago.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that you got to hold these corporations to say,
Yeah.
well, you just pledged $5 billion to the Black community, but what are Black people getting for that?
Let me stop you right there and just make sure that we put a context around what you're talking about. So when the GIs returned from World War II, after World War II, and under the GI Bill, were able to secure federally insured home loans to go out to the newly formed suburbs and Levittown and other places like that and start this Donna Reed, Dennis the Menace, Dobie Gillis kind of lifestyle. Black GIs returning were not eligible to participate in that.
Right.
In fact, it was funny because on PBS yesterday, Detroit local PBS, they had a story about the Burwood Wall. Developer had gone in and done spec development in a neighborhood in the 30s, I think, or maybe it was the 40s. And when he went to get those homes insured, FHA said, well, your neighborhood's backing right up on the homes of Black folks. And so you're in that red line, that red zone. And he made a negotiation, said, well, if I build a 6-foot high concrete block wall along the rear property line separating my neighborhood from that neighborhood, will that work? And they said, yeah, it'll work. And they insured his homes. And to this day, that artifact of segregation and racism stands. It's been on the Black community side, emblazoned with these beautiful murals that tell positive stories, but on the other side is just this banal gray wall. So those are things that the structural inequality that created the wealth disparity that restorative justice is now, seeking to repair, which goes to a lot of what both Danny and Michael, what you're talking about, is changing the structure, the barriers to entry, because we're not starting from the same position on the field.
Right.
So you have to advance us to a place where we all are able to see over the barrier equally, and then in that sense, achieve some equity. But so Michael and Danny, you mentioned Jenkins Gales Martinez. We all know our friend Earl, and he's one of the brilliant early businessmen in architecture. Maybe Michael, maybe you may have followed that beacon of how he made a successful business enterprise, because you sharp, brother. I know, you're my boy and everything. That's real good stuff. And Danny, let me tell you something. I live in Medina, man. I live in Altadena. So when Fairgrove happened, bro, we were like all in the background. Go Danny, your pops, man. That was some stuff, because that was some David and Goliath stuff. So you tell these stories like you take it for granted, but you guys put a lot at risk, your dad, and high risk, high reward, and you're the beneficiary of that and the continuation of that. For us to progress, what kind of barriers are you looking at right now? Michael, I'll start with you on that are in the way of achieving the goals that you've set for yourself.
there's a lot of barriers when you're a Black architect. You know, I really wanted to be a developer. I didn't want to be an architect. My godfather was an architect, and I saw how he changed communities. Architecture historically was a rich white man's son's profession. So, and it still has those trickle down effects of it in some ways, which is why we don't get the magnitude of projects other firms do. Fortunately, we're designing the Clippers project with AECOM, but that came because of relationships. Tony Gonzalez, who's on here, is actually one of the people I worked with who made possible relationships with HNTP. But I'd like to go back to expand upon what Danny was talking about in terms of making the banks do deals in our communities. US Bank announced they're going to be announcing $100 billion to go in Black and brown communities because of their merger with Union Bank. PNC Bank announced $88 billion over 7 years to go in Black and brown communities. JP Morgan said $30 billion. If the deals aren't there, the banks aren't going to do the deal, right? It's about how do they get it. And so one of the things that I've designed is the accelerated equity housing and transit development, specifically for Black and brown communities of Los Angeles, where 50,000 Black and brown first-time buyers get $500,000 in equity, federal subsidy, so that they can buy a fourplex. And then 50,000 existing single-family moms' houses, I call them, get about $200,000 in equity so that they can convert it into a fourplex for their kids to live. That makes a deal where the debt ratio is 65% debt and 35% equity. That's a deal that a bank's going to say, I'm interested in, right? So we have to design deals that make banks want to participate. And if that bank says, I'm not participating, we can take it to another bank, because you got a lot of banks that would say, I will take that debt ratio, because if that person loses their job, they still have income property. Collectively, what that does in our communities is solves our housing needs. And it changes mom's house into the new Tesla, the Mercedes EQS, because you can trick it out with solar panels and battery packs that make it a lower operating cost. But that would give the community the pride. And that's sort of the fear of change our community has, because we never get the right products that we need to make us attract our kids to live in the community, right? And so that's how you replenish the culture and spiral it up. We need a deal. In the end, everything, Danny's a developer, he knows. It comes down to what's the deal that's going to make financial sense. The Biden administration put out an executive order that they want to reduce racial inequities looking at George Floyd's death. So for me, that was, we need to make an ask at the Biden administration to subsidize Black and brown families to get equity to where they can purchase a fourplex and make it possible to grow our community's quality of life by strategically raising the average household income and bringing the younger generation back. And to expand on that, make a program large enough where Black and brown people can participate, just as Danny talked about. Because fourplexes are small deals, right? You could give 2, 3, or 4 of those lots to developers to build. And basically, we're looking at a team of professional services and capital resources to work with the county, because the county is actually easier, low-hanging fruit first, to entitle lots around the transit station around Slauson and Miramonte. Is that right? Yeah. Which is in that area, because you look, that Blue Line station's been there since 1994. There's no TOD, right? It's a great park across the street. But we have to be proactive in a way to do it, because political leadership doesn't know how to do it. It's just like Danny talked about. Somebody got reelected, let me do a new study, right? I've done 6 studies in Crenshaw community. But I'm basing this model along some homes I built in Leimert Park after the riots, where they sold for $154,000. I negotiated $54,000 in equity for the families. Now the homes are worth $625,000, right? The families only had to finance $92,000. Imagine if we did that for young Black and brown people that work for government agencies that can't afford to buy a house, that are paying mortgage rates to rent an apartment. But you could use that to change our communities. And I'll stop there. The bottom line is we need a deal. It needs to be large enough where children can see changes in our communities, and large enough, small enough deals that we can bring on painting contractors and people that can do $1, $2 million. These are just $2 million deals. But when you do $100,000, $2 million deals, that makes it possible for a lot of us to participate.
You know, and Stephen, let me chime in, because I think what Michael is saying, I think is such a great idea in terms building, wealth in our community, in enhancing the community we have. And like you said, getting young people. I spoke at View Park High School graduation last year. And one of the things I said is I encouraged all of those students that when you finish college, when you get your first job, that you make a commitment to come back to your community, because that's how we stop, as everybody talks about, this gentrification in our community. Those who have been trained need to want to come back into their community and bring those resources to our community. But I think more importantly, there's two things that I want to touch upon. One of them is that we have to, again, when we talk about being intentional, or when I talk about being intentional, what we have to look at is that as Black people, we have always paved the way for everybody else. Okay, so when you hear people talk about the civil rights movement of the '60s and Martin Luther King, that was about creating opportunities for Black people. But once we kicked open the door, everybody else came in that door. All of a sudden now everybody, and I'm not trying to eliminate anybody, but it's kind of like all of a sudden we kicked the door open, and then we all of a sudden found ourselves at the back of the line once we opened the door. Well, it's kind of the same thing with diversity, inclusion right now. We kicked the door open. The George Floyd murder opened the door to getting all of these banks to create these opportunities. But now DE&I includes a whole lot more people than just Black people. And once again, we find ourselves at the back of the line. Example being, you talk about, you lived in Altadena, or you live in Altadena, you know what we did in Farrell. Now, I opened this shopping center 24 years ago, okay? A shopping center a lot of people said couldn't be done. And be sure, had it failed, there would have never been another opportunity for a Black person. I was the general contractor. They had a Black general contractor. We had over 50% employees were local and African-American. We had a women-owned electrical company. We created opportunities for the entire community. But the truth is, I've never been asked to do another development in Pasadena, right? Because my success, essentially, they said, well, if we keep letting them, they'll do all the deals in the community. And I've never had that opportunity again. We kick open the door and then we get locked out once everybody else rushes in. That's part of what we've got to deal with. As a developer, it is my responsibility to create opportunities for other African-American architects, architectural firms, contracting firms. I was awarded about a year ago a big project on Slauson and Wall. I had to compete for it just like everybody else, but I also made sure that I was intentional. I've got Perkins and Wills, and I've got Gabrielle Bullock leading the way, and Drake Dillard on our architectural team. We know we're going to have an African-American contractor. I partnered with another firm, with an affordable housing firm that had a Black woman leading the Southern California division. It's not always going to be Black firms, because sometimes, as Michael said, we got to have a partner who's got the wallet and the resources, but we've got to be in control and make sure that the people sitting at the table look like us and understand the community that we're delivering for, because that's how we grow the community.
Absolutely. And the resources that you alluded to go back to a word that Michael used, which is relationships. And I want to touch on that in a little bit in terms of how, there are always unicorns, and every one of us that has achieved some level of success might be characterized as a unicorn when you compare us to the broader community. And the question is, how do you inspire an average ordinary person, whether you're a young person in that community or a senior, to believe that there's a vision out there that if they commit themselves to it in whatever way is possible for them, will turn around and produce that benefit, and it will start a sort of broad momentum of a community rather than specific individuals. Okay, so Danny, you couldn't find that paint contractor that could bond up to 20 mil or whatever. Well, today I think you can. And I think it's important that we do have an awareness of, look, Moody Nolan is the only member of the AIA Large Firm Roundtable, which is the 60 largest firms in the country, and they were invited into that table. So they penetrated that zone. Francis Carre just won the Pritzker Prize from Burkina Faso in Africa. Moody Nolan was awarded last year the AIA's highest award for a firm of the year. So yes, the tuna is swimming toward the boat, and we're actually bringing fish on board, and things are good but I wanted to make that point to say that there are Black success stories, Black investment. Accordia Partners out of Boston, Kirk Sykes, the largest Black investment house in the country, Troy Nash in St. Louis. These individuals are breaking through, and they are bringing along with them as many people of color as they can. But now, it's like Super Mario. You do all that stuff and you get through to the level, but oh shoot, now I got to go to the next higher level, and you got a whole bunch of more stuff to deal with. So as you ascend, I'm interested in the challenges, but I'm also interested in the importance of relationships and how you all have been able to each use your ability to develop and form relationships to further advance your initiatives, your causes. So I'll flip it and start with you on that, Danny.
Well, I think, look, relationships drive everything. Political relationships, business relationships, things like that. And even just finding resources. There's times where you just need somebody who's got an expertise that you don't have. And you've got to be able to admit to yourself, first and foremost, I don't have that expertise, but I know somebody who can either provide it to me, or I can, or I can hire it, or whatever that case may be. So I think you've got to continuously work your relationships. As you talk about the Super Mario Brothers concept, yes, you're going to take yourself up to the next level. We want to continue to strive, but you got to also know that there's somebody in your rears that's going to take your spot at that level, and you got to work. Look, I'm going up here and I'm going to do this project. Who's going to be the person doing that project back there? We've got to continuously work those relationships. We got to continuously be mindful of, it's not just about me. It can't just be about me. It can't just be about my family and the opportunity. I've always got to make sure that there's somebody in the wings that's ready to step in, because my community that relied on me, when I step out of here, look, it's kind of like around here. My dad was the trailblazer that created and opened all the doors. I am not foolish enough to believe that I did any of this on my own. But what I did have to understand was that, as my dad said to me a long time ago, being Danny Bakewell Jr. can get you in the door. What you are capable of doing once you get in the door is what's going to keep you in the room. And I really have spent my life and my energy making sure that when that opportunity comes for me to get into the room, I am capable and qualified to stay in the room, and not just a bumbling idiot who's just sitting in there because their daddy was able to open the door. That's what we've got to do. That's our responsibility collectively to each other, is to make sure that, each one teach one, reach back, pull somebody up. Those are, great analogies, but that is a reality that we also have to live with.
Beautiful. I hear that. Michael.
I'm just gonna say amen to what he said, which is.
I thought you was gonna pass the plate, man.
No, the fact that one of the things that's lacking and didn't happen in our communities is there wasn't a nurturing of each generation to become better than the previous generation. And that, in some ways, to me, by not happening, we don't have the successes that have gone on. Just like he said, his father made it possible for him, but made it him intelligent enough to know the deals on his own to do that. And that's one of the reasons why in the program, and I'm not just putting it on me, and it's in the book, the Accelerated Equity Housing Development Strategy for Black and Brown Communities is large enough where, as the private source making that happen, the large firms that we bring to the table for the deals, we can mandate they hire young men and women from the communities to shadow them in the summertime, where they can get the experience of how change is made in the communities. If it's the engineer, the architect, the lawyer, the entitlement firm, make it possible so that I can sit back and say, this deal is large enough that we can bring those people in. Because our ask of the federal government is $30 billion over 7 years. Right? I mean, I figured out how Congress allocates the money, just like I got the $3 million for Century Boulevard in Inglewood. It's about how do you make an ask at the federal government and explain to them how they're going to get their money back. Whether it's 30 years from now, they get it back, but you use that $30 billion to leverage banks to say, I want in. And you make a deal large enough so that we can modernize our communities proactively. And you incentivize the other smaller cities to perform, just like we were talking about Compton. Compton doesn't perform as well. Inglewood is the proof of product of what leadership can do when you perform well. He took a $2 billion project that was on hold for 7 years. I mean, I designed Century Boulevard in 1999 and got AIALA to put $5 million into the deal. No leadership could get that deal going until Mayor Butts got in office, right? Got him $3 million from the federal government. The city can do the application. After 4 years, they hired me to do the application, although I identified the funding. I got it done in 6 months. That's what I mean about we need a team that has the professional knowledge and resources to make the deals necessary that even Black investors want to put into our community. Because Black people that have access to capital, they don't want to do deals in our communities because political leadership wants to go on dates, want to go to dinner, and they don't have a deal ready. But these people are using other people's money to do a deal. And so we have to take a different approach, and it has to be large enough to where Danny's Jr. journey can be replicated thousands of times. But you have the environment for that to happen, right? Because the kids lose hope very early. A teacher said kids stop being kids in South Los Angeles at 12 years old. I took a kid and had him help me on Lamar Park Homes, who was failing. His mother was a crackhead. By the end of the semester, he was getting straight A's, right? Just because I was paying him to be a part of the project, right? And so you see, that is the chemistry and the relationships. That's the deeper relationship I'm seeking.
Yeah.
It's for these children to become better adults. Because when you and I, just as Danny said, when we leave this platform, we have to hope they make the communities we're in better so that we can grow around in the quality of life that they make.
Steve, let me just say one last thing on this. When we talk about relationships, you also have to have a relationship with the community in which you work in. And that relationship is really built upon trust.
That's right.
It's a relationship built on you deliver what you promise you were going to do, be it jobs. I mean, I tell people all the time, you're better off, particularly in the Black community, when people come in there and talk about jobs, you're better to say, look, we're going to deliver 10 jobs, okay? And really deliver 10 jobs, then go in there as a lot of elected officials and developers come and say, we're going to have 300 jobs. And then when we walk around, there's no Black people on the jobs and all that. You need to say and do exactly what you said you were going to do. And I'll just do this. In Pasadena, when Vallarta, which replaced Vines in my shopping center about 3 years ago, Vines closed there. Vines decided they were closing that store. And I had people come and they started questioning, do we want Vallarta? Do we not want Vallarta? And after a whole lot of conversation, finally, I just had to say, look, guys, you have to trust me. I'm telling you, this is going to be a good grocery store and a good operator. I said, remember back when, they told you Vines wouldn't come here and I delivered Vines. Remember when they told you Starbucks wouldn't come here or wouldn't make it and I delivered Starbucks and it's one of the top performing stores in the city, blah, blah, blah. I said, so I'll tell you what, take my word for it. And if it doesn't be everything I'm telling you it's going to be, I'll be back here because y'all all know how to find me because I'm right here in this community. The store opened, and now every time I go down the street, somebody tells me how much they love that store and how it's a great operator and this and that. But that's based upon a relationship. At some point, you got to be able to have a relationship where people are willing to trust you. And so for so long, our community has been made promises that developers, Black and white, did not fulfill. And that's really how we begin to move our community along.
And and the trust issue is hard because just as the Charlie Brown episode, trying to kick the football and Lucy pulls it back at the last minute and he goes spinning up in the air, how many times has that happened? How many times have promises been broken to a point where, to protect your own emotion, you don't want to even consider that it could be true or could be successful, what you're talking about? Why would it? So this trust building as a campaign almost is
Look,
extremely critical.
We here in Leimert Park, how long has Crenshaw and Exposition, that big lot where Ralph's used to be, been sitting there vacant? Community's been promised everything from a Target to everything else. We're not even going to deal with Chris Hammond and Martin Square and all the drama that came along with that, which has been sitting vacant for 40 years, damn near. The problem is we have to have developers that the community trusts, but those developers have to deliver for that community, you know, and that's really, and so often those developers with the track record of delivering, those architects and contractors with the record of delivering for the community get locked out after they one time they deliver. That's just that's the unfortunate reality of what we're dealing with, because we show you the value of doing something positive in our community. And once we show you the value, then everybody else comes running in and seizes the opportunity.
So
Yeah.
if I can, Steve, I want to go back to something when you mentioned about Nolan Moody. Their firm's success came because Marion Barry, when he was mayor, started moving development into the Black community, and then started making sure Black architects got those projects, and that helped a lot of those firms spiral up. And I think Tom Bradley was the last person that I saw made a lot of Black people wealthy in terms of participation of the projects that were being built as he directed in the city, right? And now, because of Prop 209, some political leadership are scared to say the Black people are my constituents, which I don't understand. It's like, so the other people are your constituents too. It's not about a color. But our leadership, and I point this out because I've watched this happen, hasn't focused on making sure we were included all along the way. Danny can't be the only one saying, I have to figure out how to make somebody included. It has to happen all across where we are.
Well, that's nothing new. That's nothing new. That has been our condition. That's been our biggest condition that we have yet to figure out how to overcome.
We need to talk about it so that it's understood. And that's why, it's that's one thing I can give Mayor Butts is we got the Clippers project because it was like, look, this is private capital. I can do what I want to do, right? And so,
but we have to rewind the tape a little bit for our audience, because some may know, but many don't. Just to understand the frustrations that the three of us are surfacing for everyone here, we have to look back. Okay, slavery was abolished in 1863, and then for 2 more years, it continued to exist in Texas until Juneteenth, when everybody finally found out they had been freed, and that was that. So now all of a sudden you've got the U.S. industrial complex upon which the wealth and power of this nation was built on the back of Black people who were enslaved. Now, where's that workforce go? Oh, Reconstruction. Okay, 10 years where we all of a sudden start holding political office, 8 congressmen of people of color, landowners starting to sharecrop, farm that land, whatever. Meanwhile, plantation owners like, well, shit, pardon my French, everybody. We got to figure this out. So convict leasing comes into being. You're loitering. We'll round you up. We'll bring you to the place. And when your former master comes into town tomorrow, he can lease you for 1/10 the cost of what it costs to keep you as an enslaved person. And so I'm going to work you till you literally drop dead, and I'm going to go back and lease somebody else. That convict leasing perpetuated into the 1950s, only to be then replaced by the prison industrial complex. So our families have been destroyed by structural racism to a point where when we talk about issues of trust, and people want to know, well, why don't Black people trust each other? Why this, why that? Because the structure has been built for exclusion and for sublimation. And now, to unpack it and to take it apart, you need to understand what the parts and pieces are. So I just want to provide that kind of context, because, we're each referring to our own personal lived experiences as models of how you can overcome these things and how painful it is along the way, because of the need to bring along, a community which is never going to be easy or never going to be, uniformly successful. So, having said that, we have the platform that we're operating on today, and then we have the future. So and what time we have left, and I'm not sure if we're down to just 8 minutes or whether we have a longer session than an hour, but just quickly, each of you guys, give me your outlook for the future, short-term, midterm, long-term future. Michael.
Oh, damn. My outlook is promising. Well, let me say I'm 50-50 because there's some dynamics going on in terms of changing the laws of how we do things. But California, I think, is in a unique position because it shows diversity creates economic power. Los Angeles is the #1 GDP producer in the United States out of the 3,006 counties in the United States. We subsidize the rest of the country. California has 7 counties that produce 1/10 to almost 2 trillion of the US GDP. So our diversity shows that we're doing some things right. My concern is that if we don't change direction now, if we don't make the right ask of the Biden administration that's offering to subsidize, invest into Black communities, right, we're going to blow it again, just like we blew it after the riots of 1990s, right? So if you don't have the deals there for the money to go into, then the money is going to go to other things such as affordable housing, which services people that don't live in the community. It's just and it increases low income impaction. So my outlook is hopeful if we get the deal right now. If we don't and blow it, everybody's going to be on their own like they were pretty much over the past 30, 40 years. And that would be an extreme disappointment when you have a Black vice president, a woman from California, a Treasury Secretary from California, the forces, the decision makers that could fund projects specifically for Black communities of California, that success would then want to be replicated across the United States. You could grow the economy $14 trillion by fixing up Black communities across the United States over the next 20 years if you knew what to do.
All right, Danny.
Look, I like to always stay positive. So I think to start with, the answer to your question is, I believe that things are going to continue to improve, and the quality of life for Black people in all communities of color are going to continuously improve. But as Michael said, we have to get it right. And it's going to have a leveling of the scales. Either it's going to level from the left or from the right. I'm not quite sure which side, depending on which side it's leaning to. Either the federal government's got to infuse dollars into the Black community that allow us to kind of get on an equitable ground, or politicians at the state level and things are going to have to. Every elected official right now is talking desperately about, on the campaign trail, is talking about their commitment and need for affordable housing. But if you undress that and you look at the laws that they make when they're not on the campaign trail, they pass laws that say, construction has to be at prevailing wage and this way. So you've driven the construction cost up. You re-abolished the redevelopment agency, and you passed a law that says all government land has to be sold at market rate. So now all of a sudden, so you've taken the construction cost and taken it to the top. You've taken the labor cost and taken it to the top. And then you say, but I want to build affordable housing. The scales do not balance. The two just do not work together, and that is the problem. So somewhere along the way, either, as Michael said, the government's got to put some money in there to balance it this way, or it's got to come down the other way. But somewhere it's got to balance. If not, we're going to continue to have a whole lot of market rate units that are going to get built, and we're going to have, because look, the community talks about affordable housing, but we cannot put all of the affordable housing along Crenshaw Boulevard. We saw that 50 years ago, 60 years ago. They called housing projects, right? You can't put all the affordable housing and all the low-income people lumped together and expect there to be a quality of life, a raise in the quality of life. It just doesn't work. And we know that. So we've got to look at it, but we've got to be willing to deal with those realities. We got to be willing to say that out loud, because the minute the affordable housing folks, who usually don't need affordable housing, the majority of the affordable housing advocates I know live in the Valley and don't need affordable housing. right? But they the main one screaming, we need more affordable housing. We got to call it out and have that conversation and say, no, you want some more, you need some more affordable, go put it in Calabasas. Calabasas needs some affordable housing too, right? But they don't want it there. They want it all along Crenshaw.
Yeah.
So let's have those open conversations and call it what it is. And
I think, Danny, sorry, but we're about to do some Q&A with the audience, but I want to just say, as I'm listening to both of you and understanding kind of how both of you have been operating and admiring that, to move this big vision forward, I think we really need coalitions among ourselves, which include, I don't know whether y'all know about Dr. Mindy Fullilove she's in New Jersey now. She's a social psychiatrist. She wrote that book, Root Shock, which was about the shock of people being dislocated from their places where their roots are. And Mindy has now written 8 books, but bringing the full spectrum of professionals, planners, designers, architects, developers, contractors into a coalition so that we reduce or eliminate as many blind spots to making the progress that we need to make as possible, so that we don't expend all of our energies only to then reach a precipice where we're falling in and falling off the cliff because we missed a key piece of that puzzle. I just want to encourage us as we go forward to think broadly in terms of conversations we want to extend beyond our specific cohorts, whether it's you in construction and development, Danny, whether it's you, Michael, in terms of urban architecture and development, to bring those other pieces into this puzzle. And hopefully enough of that puzzle will be completed, while never in our lifetime will we see the entire picture. Maybe enough of that vision will come clearer to give us the inspiration and motivation to continue to invest in that path.
Can I get 15 seconds? Everything you just said is in accelerated equity housing and TD. It's all the resources are there, the people are there, the capital sources are there. I mean, it's ready to go. You need to have a shovel-ready approach. We don't need to rethink this anymore. All we need to do is act. I mean, believe I've spent 40 years creating this strategy. Not to sound selfish, we need just action. We don't need to think, study. We're ready to go. That's all I gotta say. Just no more thinking. Just get to work. Kids need to work. We need the houses.
I'll accept that as a sort of final manifesto, brother.
absolutely.
But we can move into some Q&A. How's that going to be managed? Craig or Will or Corinne?
Steve needs some help here.
I'm just dangling. We're getting some good chat
I
messages.
said plenty of time for a Q&A. We just need people to put questions into the chat. And so we will call on people. So I know that Leslie has a comment. Leslie, if you want to join in the conversation to get this Q&A started, because I think this is a really good opportunity for everyone to really join in and learn some more, get their questions answered, and get some advice.
Yeah, I was just speaking to the point about all the, affordable housing on Crenshaw, for example. I just feel like, and this is something my mother spoke to. My mother grew up in New York City in the 30s, 40s, 50s. That desegregation was not all good because we all used to live together. It was doctors and lawyers and teachers and upper income people and lower income people. When you stick all the low income people together and there's no services and there's no example of what a better life can be, it's not a good thing.
Well,
Yeah,
I would agree with you. I mean, I think that, desegregation was not really good for our community in many ways because we lost our, if you look at Black communities across from New Orleans to Crenshaw corridor, Detroit, wherever you're from, we had thriving Black business. We had thriving, we were self-sufficient. We had hotels, we had dry cleaners, we had grocery stores. We had everything that our community needed. But then all of a sudden, when desegregation occurred and we stopped owning our own businesses, we stopped owning our own resources. And, unfortunately, we got bougie, we got uppity, whatever you want to call it. and we got a job. You know, I don't need to go work at my grandfather's grocery store. I got a job at IBM. I can go work for Xerox. But then all of a sudden, the reality is in the 80s, Xerox started laying off. And then you didn't have that opportunity to go back to that family-owned business in which you had an opportunity and that you own. And by then, your grandfather had sold that business. And unfortunately,
and you
they
lost
didn't
that,
sell it
and
to
you
another
lost-
Black person.
And meanwhile, when IBM laid you off, you lost that 7,000 square foot house you bought out in West Podunk. But
there you go. So all of that, so I completely agree. So we've got to begin to take heed of ownership and of our Black business. Look, this whole conversation is about creating opportunities, and when those opportunities arise, you know, be it with if the resources that Michael is talking about from the federal government, when those opportunities, what I could tell you is if all of a sudden, you know, when I'm given an opportunity to do a development, when those opportunities come about, the team that I put on the field is going to look like the community we serve. It's going to have Black contractors, Black workers, Black architects, Black planners, at every Black insurance companies, Black lawyers, because we are capable at every level of stepping up. And what's funny is when I walk into a meeting and my team, but nobody ever questions when you go to a meeting and you're the only Black face in there and their whole team looks like them, that's normal. But when my whole team looks like me, well, you know, what's going on here? Well, I'm bringing my team and my team looks like me. That's the reality of uplifting our community. That's the reality of what we as a community, as business people, owe each other, is to ensure that when we step up our game, now we got to be able to perform, don't get me wrong.
that's right. That's right.
But when I come to the table, I know the people that I show up with can perform.
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Yes.
There are
gonna say,
questions, a few questions have come to the chat.
Michael Jory has a question. I was going to address that about single family resident owners. How do we get more single family owners to want to micro develop their properties when our elders have long been told that single family residences are how we maintain quality of life for our neighborhoods?
Oh, well, see, actually, the single family homes is the low hanging fruit. And what I mean by that is if I could secure a family to get $100,000 to $200,000 to trick their house out, where that house has solar, it becomes an elegant four-yard fourplex courtyard housing. Courtyard housing was done in the 1920s in LA. You know, there's a lot of them in West Hollywood that rent or sell for a tremendous amount. But mom's fear for change, I remodeled my grandmother's house. She was crazy for 9 months and afterwards brought every church member over. And I say that because once you trick that house out and mom has that new Tesla, that EQS in terms of the house having solar panels, being elegant, you can remodel mom's house and keep it the 1920s craftsman house. But if you put the 3 units in the back prefabricated for the family and kids, when that's in the community, everybody will say, I want one, right? Because that fear of change of knowing what the end product is often prevents people from wanting to be the first one. But as soon as someone has that best product, the other people want to replicate. If you ever seen someone trick out their landscaping in a neighborhood, all of a sudden somebody next door is going to want to trick theirs out. And the person down the street decides they want to hire the same person or do their version of it. Yeah. That is what the layering process that can happen. But what's missing is how do we help them be able to afford that? And I'm saying the government subsidy is the government's way of saying, I'm making amends for the redlining I did historically, which is why you get this $200,000, right?
But you're also talking about a way that they can get that money back.
Yeah, they'll get the money back.
So rather than subsidy is an investment and there'll be some return on that investment.
Oh, it depends on who you're talking to. If I'm talking to conservatives, I'm gonna say the government's gonna make an investment. Talking to, you know, some people, it's gonna be a subsidy. If I'm talking to Black people, it's gonna be reparations, right? But it's still the same thing. You just need this magnitude of capital to make the deal work, right?
Yeah. I want to put an exclamation point on what Danny was saying about bringing along his team, because there are certain very conscious and intentional individuals with resources who do surround themselves with what Steve Lott, my former partner at Raw, used to say is that that clients, even if especially if you're a Black client, you surround yourself by what he called the white picket fence. And it's impossible or very difficult to penetrate that fence. Accountants, lawyers, all of those professionals become their trusted advisors. And for us to achieve that status among our own people has been a real issue and a stretch. I want to give credit to Spike Lee, because when he came to LA and opened up Spike's Joint West on Melrose, every facet of that project was done by a Black professional. The real estate agent who got him that space, the architects were Raw. Lisa Comfort did the interiors, Robert Moore, they did the construction. And when he would finish the project, he celebrated that by inviting us all to a big soiree up on Sunset, where I almost lost my wife, because when we walked in the door, Kareem was sitting there, and then she just like left me and went over there. So but I survived that. Drake Dillard has his hand up, and then Craig Atkinson has his hand up after Drake.
Hey, Steve, can you hear me?
Yeah, got you, Drake.
I just wanted to acknowledge you guys. Great panel. Of course, I know all three of you very well, but I appreciate you telling the truth. Wanted to make one comment though, and I know Michael was very animate about the direction we should go, and I've read his book. It's a great book, a lot of details in it, a lot of history as it relates to our community, and also the politics and community leaders as well, which I think is very interesting. But I had written down a number of questions for you guys, and as soon as I wrote them down, you answered them. So that's very good. But I want to at least leave with one thing, and that is that I think, well, actually two. And again, I think I'm speaking to the choir here, but I think when you talk about Crenshaw, a lot of times we talk about Crenshaw as if it's a poor neighborhood. We talk about it in terms of, below market rate housing, affordable housing. But when you look at Crenshaw, at least the way I see it, we have View Park, and in no way do I look at that community as a poor neighborhood. We have Baldwin Hills, we have Lamert Park, and so on. And so I think for whatever reason, when we start particularly looking at community groups, certain images lead the conversation, and I think it's important that we make sure that all voices are heard. And it's actually a very diverse community, economically, as well as in other ways. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to just make a comment on is I think Michael mentioned this about shadowing in large projects in our communities. I think it's important, and I know all three of you agree with this. We have so many things happening around us, whether it's a big project in Exposition Park, whether it's a sport arena in Inglewood, or other big projects. And again, from an architectural construction point of view, yes, we should be involved, but also our youth and our community should be involved with those projects in a way that they can learn from it and shadow, I think, as Michael might have mentioned, other architects and contractors to learn from it. All this money is passing through, millions and millions of dollars passing through our communities, and our youth are not taking advantage, not giving any advantage over that. Yeah. But I think also too, we being NOMA as well as other organizations, must unify to make sure that these things happen. I mean, there should be millions of dollars allocated to organizations like NOMA to help with this. Well, not 10,000, not 20,000, but millions. I mean,
and we know that we've taken whatever we could get and what we've gotten, and we've made the most of it with our project pipeline, which started with about 15 young people and now is over 100, 150 every summer who get that thorough indoctrination into the design professions. And some of them have now gone through college and graduated and are teaching our students in the new project pipeline camps. And I also want to say that AIA has been an incredible partner with NOMA and continues to be at a national level. But I see Craig and then I see Tibby following him. And if we could keep our comments somewhat brief, I want to give everybody a chance to talk. Michael, you wanted to
I
yell
was
at
sharp
something?
in terms of what Drake said. He said, people talk about Crenshaw as if it's a poor community. Crenshaw is low income impacted, but it's surrounded by an upper income community. Crenshaw Boulevard doesn't look like a modern boulevard that reflects the quality of living up in the hills. That needs to be corrected.
After Drake's project, Drake and Gabrielle's project is
So
done,
let
and
me
it's a different story.
pause right there, because Drake's project is one component of hundreds of components that are needed. So you can't have one project think it's going to resurrect. Yes, it's a linear project, it hence, but the sidewalks in Crenshaw don't look like Montana Boulevard. The storefronts don't, because the property owners aren't doing anything. So all that needs to change, and it's the economic chemistry you have to design to make it change, just like Issa Rae's investment in Hilltop Cafe. That's happening in Inglewood because Inglewood's going up, right? It's not happening on Crenshaw Lamert Park, which we wanted to happen for 3 to 4 decades. That's the economic chemistry of the design. I'll stop.
All right. Well, let me go on to Craig.
Yeah, I think I have a couple quick questions, and the first one's kind of from Michael, and in the sense that, listening to your program, I think it's very kind of ambitious to get money into the community. Is there a portion of your program or your thought process that comes with financial and fiscal education, right? How to take this money and really make it work for you, right?
Yes.
And not just be,
Yes.
a $500,000 federal program or whatever else. Is it something that comes with this idea, here's how you build wealth in the community?
So Neighborhood Housing Services is the service, the nonprofit. In order to do this deal would be a public-private partnership in conjunction with LA County Development Authority. In order for it to be an unsolicited proposal, we need a nonprofit as the lead. NHS has agreed to serve as that lead. I selected them because they focus on home ownership for first-time buyers. The other thing is that they would, and this is all schematic design at this phase, so the design development, they would be the financial steward giving out the $500,000 of the equity to the first-time buyer, to the single-family homeowner. The purpose of that is because a person has so much equity, they automatically going to become attractive for predators because you have this income property. That is where the education takes place for understanding how to deal with real estate transactions, how to prevent a contractor from putting a lien on the house. They have to go back to NHS before they engage in a deal that puts their property at risk. And so part of the strategy here is to design a program large enough that has all-inclusive elements for the problems and challenges we've had to have dealt with historically that have exploited the Black community, right? So you want to lock it in to where there's no creation of no new organizations, is to take the existing organizations and make them grow, because we're solving a housing need, which is the entity that grows the larger market. But there's nothing new. Everything is utilized, already exists. And that's why I make the reference to the Tesla, because Tesla's a car that used existing technologies, combined it all into one, and made an efficient mode of transportation that made it cheap to drive and look good, right? And so
I don't know about cheap.
Well,
I don't know if that's the right terminology.
but that's why I got the subsidy, right? So that's the purpose of the subsidy, right? Is that these homes aren't cheap, right? These are 1.6 to $2 million fourplexes. They're prefabricated so they can be delivered to the site and assembled within 2 days, right? It's to make a person get in the house right away and to transform our communities rapidly in a shorter period of time, but to grow the economy rapidly. The federal subsidies, what makes it affordable, right? Just like you said, Tesla's not cheap, but if all of a sudden you got 25% of your cost subsidized, you could go buy a Tesla, right?
And then kind of the second question, which is more of a general question, how do, you have a lot of architects on the line and a lot of people, how do we help participate in the projects that we have today, the projects that we have tomorrow? How do we start to move our design thinking and our ideation into that place where we can help communities?
So the advantage of having a private capital-led source of professional services enables me, just like Mayor Butts is doing in Inglewood, to assemble the focus on Black and brown people to participate, because it's private capital. We're the conductors of the orchestra. We're inviting the people to play. We can select them based on that community's need. And this is all about making it happen at a scale large enough that it's mutually beneficial to everyone. The largest beneficiary is to be the county in terms of property tax revenues, because we need property tax revenues to upgrade the infrastructure in our communities. Black and brown communities have 100-year-old infrastructure. When I did this transit station in Compton, I ran into wooden sewers with liners inside, right? That's a typical problem that we ask developers to pay the fees for, that then doesn't get built in you and I's lifetime. I'm saying we can take all those fees out of the equation because we have a larger program that plans to address it in a shorter period of time.
All right, Craig, those are your two pieces. Appreciate those questions and the responses. Tibby.
Hey, Stephen, may I, since I'm staff and Michael Gates is a guest, and it's very possible you didn't see his question in the chat yet, may I allow him to ask a question and then I'll make a quick comment? Is that okay?
Sure.
What's the question?
Michael, I don't know if you want to ask it or just have Stephen read it from the chat.
Michael Glory? Which Michael?
I see a Matthew Gates.
It's Matthew Gates. His
Yeah.
question
Is there a risk?
Yeah.
Is there a risk of increasing ADUs, TOD, or SB9 without increasing access to amenities? The question went away. That are already
yes, insufficient.
So if you looked at, I use West Hollywood as an example of a community that evolved into a modern place to live that has great walkability. Communities always evolve, right? And so in the end, we do need increased density. It's just, what is that density going to be? It's okay to have, to me, 2-story, 4-yard courtplexes, because that's a typical graduation of what's already there. A lot of communities still want to hold on to single family homes and yards and things. That doesn't work in an urban place that's growing successfully like Los Angeles. It's why Black kids have to move outside the community and don't come back to the communities they came from, because there's not the housing that meets their needs, right?
But Michael, wait a minute. I think the question is more about the kind of infrastructure needed: water, sewer, at a time where we're in a severe drought, water, sewer, garbage collection, all of those services that already stretched and don't.
Okay.
And I think part of your plan was infrastructure.
So that's already included. So one of the things about these houses designs came from the Mayor Garcetti's low-rise design competition. So the homes come with water reclamation systems. So when it rains, it collects the water, it goes underground. You have gray water piping so that you're reusing water from the sinks in certain areas to do the landscaping. That's what I mean by giving the community a modern element that functions in the 21st century. When Black and brown people have a facility like that, upper income people want, or sometimes can design and build, that to me is what's going to make people make them proud of where they live and what they live in, right? So the purpose is, how do you design housing that reduces the burden? And that's the purpose. Solar panels with battery packs that charge, and you use the battery packs to run your HVAC, you're going to have a low heating and air conditioning bill. The house is fully insulated. It has modern security features and lighting elements that make it a great place to live in an urban environment. And I think once we have more of those popping up, our communities will be a better place, and young Black and brown people move back, who will also bring their lifestyles to Crenshaw Boulevard, right? Because their lifestyle is not on Crenshaw Boulevard, and it can turn into the Montana Avenue of the Mer Park.
Okay, well, we may have a once in a lifetime situation here where one Tibby's question is following another Tibby.
And what is
That's
that?
so funny.
Hi.
Actually, yeah, I just said that to Tibby Dunbar. Stephen, I had a quick comment before I cede to my fellow Tibby. Gentlemen, Mr. Blackwell, Michael, and Stephen, it is so incredible to get to sit in on this panel.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for giving your time to come talk to us. I'm gonna sit after today, I'm gonna actually watch the whole thing just quietly by myself, but this has been incredible. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Timmy. Danny and I really want the deals. We want to get to work. You know, I'm tired of studying stuff. Let's start building. You know, we don't need to drill.
Let's move some dirt.
Right. And you know, you can do what you say you want to do. Go ahead, Tibby. Hi, Tibby.
Hi. Hey. Hi, Michael. And nice to meet you, Danny and Stephen. I know that one of the things I witnessed, well, because we were shopping for forever in Los Angeles for a house and still continue to look, but we watched in Leimert Park, for example, which was a lovely community, but like buses were coming in with people with money and buying houses. And so the community was being completely offset by all these outside forces. What's to stop that from happening once you've got these beautiful fourplex courtyard houses with the solar panels and everything, that someone's not going to come in a busload again to flip houses and offer so much money that these people can't really refuse. And this is, I know this is a problem, and I know because I've seen campaigns where it says, don't sell, you know, in these Black and brown communities, which ultimately leads to their losing home ownership and the community becomes something completely different. How does one negotiate that?
That's a hard challenge to deal with, but one of the things I'm trying to do is drive investments into the lower and lower income impacted areas. Right now, the investors are attracted to Crenshaw and Leimert Park. It's getting gentrified because of the rail system and those things. But you start going south, Watts, Willowbrook, Compton, East Los Angeles, where the West Santa Ana Branch Transit Corridor is supposed to go. They start targeting those areas for this type of investment, where we start there first and then look at a mile radius where you're doing it within a mile radius of a transit station, because then you can take a bike to the transit station. But it's going to be hard to deter speculators. As soon as rail goes in, you know, CIM bought up all the property on Adams and Jefferson, right? They had the cap. They didn't be foreign. They used foreign people's money and did it themselves. Though that's the history of LA. And that's one of the reasons why I'm attracted to doing mom and pop houses, because they already own a lot. And then two, doing smaller lots that are either owned by the county and other areas around these transit stations. There's a lot of underdeveloped property that's sitting there, especially at Slauson and Miramonte. That, I mean, DWP site's one of my first prototype sites I want to target, right? DWP's got 9 acres sitting there right across from a park. Houses have been turned into auto storage yards and things like that. Is that maybe we target that and start focusing in those areas. But speculators with capital is hard to overcome.
It's a free market capitalist society.
Right. But the flip side of the equation, Tibby, is if we start building more homes at a volume and deliver them faster, you start to spread out where that activity is going, right? Because right now, when a market becomes hot, Inglewood or Crenshaw, that's where the capital source is going to go. And that's why I said, let's go focus on areas like down at Imperial and the 105, around Charles Drew and Martin Luther King Hospital, along the West Santa Ana Branch Corridor at Atlantic and Firestone Boulevard. You have all these opportunities to make investments over there. That then when the people with the capital come over, we've already made it solid for at least 10,000 families in those areas.
And I think the other thing is that, you know, when we talk about these incentives, we talk about these equity gifts. What you also can do is that, particularly when you're talking about lower income families that you build in incentives for this I'm gonna just call it subsidy, for lack of a better word, that Michael's talking about, that says that subsidy is forgiven over a period of time that you own your house. So you can't just flip your house. You can't get $200,000, $300,000 from the federal government, build this fourplex, and then turn around next month after, you know, a week after it gets a C of O and put it on the market. You say, you got this $200,000 or $500,000, whatever that investment is, you've got, if you hold on to it for 10 years, then that loan is forgiven. But short of that, that encourages long-term capital, you know, long-term holding of your investment. Eventually, like you said, this is a capitalistic society. People want to be able to sell their house for lots of different reasons. But I think you can structure, and NHS is very good at that. I used to work for Pasadena Neighborhood Housing Services a long, long time ago. They're good at structuring things because they're all about long-term home ownership, and we can create those kinds of programs. So.
Oh, yeah. So Danny, what I was gonna say to answer that $500,000 equity and the percentage of that equity stays in the house for like whatever, 20, 25, 30 years before it's forgiven, right? That way a person, as Danny said, can't just come in and flip it. The reason for that is if you sell it or have to move for some reason and you do sell it, that the next buyer is typically Black or brown and they get that equity percentage to sit in there because we're trying to, again, replenish the culture of the community. But I think typically when you have a fourplex and you're renting one of the units out to a family member or your child, that's how we create generational wealth, especially in Los Angeles, right? Because one person may move, the other person may stay there, right? And that way it stays in the family. And that's what we're really trying to do, make it possible so that the kids live on the same lot with their parents and eventually become the grandkids and so forth. And you help add to the quality of life of living in South Los Angeles or East LA.
I know Will just dropped a link into the chat about AB 1771 parentheses Ward, which may, and Will, you may want to just unmute and explain briefly what that is.
Sure, it's quite a controversial bill, so I don't necessarily think it'll pass or go any further. But essentially, AB 1771 would aim to add a 25% tax, capital gains tax on houses that were bought and sold by real estate speculators. This might help address some of the issues that Tibby Dunbar was raising with global scale investment coming and out competing all of us that live here locally. But I think that this is something that we should look at the state level and sort of further examine if it's a smart bill or not.
Okay, I'll be happy to look at it and get some input on it. Often it seems like our bills are reactionary, and just like Danny said, they come out of Sacramento, and raise the cost of developing housing or either create an impact that stops people from doing it. But I want to digress quickly, Steve, and say one thing. I hope some people can look at a book called White Space, Black Hood by Cheryl Cashin. And it talks about how Black and brown communities do not capture the tax revenues they generate to make their communities beautiful. And the reason I'm talking about that is because there's transportation taxes, there's all taxes we pay. Black and brown communities get out-politicked on how that money comes back into their communities. And that's one of the reasons why I was designing the strategy, is to make that money come back to the communities in a large way as equity for Black and brown people. And she shows, and I'll give you an example here in LA. The purple line was not to go past La Cienega because the people west of La Cienega said, we don't want people on the purple line coming west of La Cienega. When gas prices went up, the purple line not only went west of La Cienega to Westwood, it goes all the way out to Century City and other places, right, to the VA Center, right? And yet we cannot get the West Santa Ana branch corridor built because it got pushed to the back, which serves a 90% Hispanic community that's working class. That project would allow that community to get rid of a car. And the same, we can't make the improvements to our streets around the blue line and within our communities, period. We just don't get them. And that's where we're paying taxes as Black and brown people, and we don't have the projects for us to ask to put that money back into. And that was the other purpose why I said we need a team that's capital sources and professional services to modernize our communities around our transit stations proactively, where we can do all the things that Danny and others have pointed out here. Because the politicians are gonna say, let's study what to do. We don't need to study what to do. I've been in this business 44 years. I know exactly what to do. Danny knows what to do because he's been trying to build it, right? Most of the architects on here that are Black and brown from the communities know what to do, right? We just need to go out and build the right things. And it's not just buildings, it's streets, it's making alleys into play yards for kids to make them safe. It's coming up with projects that make our communities beautiful overall. And most importantly, they have to be profitable. You can have balanced income communities that work very well, but they got to generate a profit.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of our other attendees dropped something in about church land being very interesting for community housing development. That's something that's got a legacy to it as well. And so many barriers to building affordably, building affordable housing affordably have been put in place by the requirements, to Danny's point, to deliver the same physical unit as a market rate versus affordable, qualified affordable unit. The cost is ridiculously higher, just based on the kind of hoops and hurdles, regulatory things that you have to go through. And it's all set up so that tax write-offs become the incentive for investment in affordable housing. And so again, it's a formula that's balanced. And I'm not saying it's color preferential, but the people who are trading in that market most often are not our people. And so you're gonna, by reducing the cost of delivering affordable housing, you're gonna eliminate a profit center, a tax haven for many big investment pools of funds.
The low income tax credits benefit rich people.
LIHTC, yeah.
Bank of America owns 9,000 affordable housing units, right? So you can see how they write these laws because it's in their interest to do so, you know, and that's why affordable housing units cost $650,000 to $750,000 per unit. It's ridiculous. That's why we're looking at prefabricated housing. It's $200 a square foot, delivering faster. You use private capital, you get around all that crap. And that's what we have to make for our people, for our communities, to make it happen faster. We got to bypass this bureaucracy set up to help those who have the capital resources designed around their needs.
Amen. I'm gonna pass the plate now.
Well, I do have I am trying to get the McKinsey and Company's economic assessment funded, because that's what's to go to the White House. So if you want me to talk about that, I am trying to raise $650,000 for their study. McKinsey and Company, you know, did the study of affordable housing needs in Los Angeles. They want to do an economic investment impact assessment of the accelerated equity housing and transit development. And I put that out there because that report is to go to Cecilia Rouse, chair of the White House Economic Advisory Council, as well as Tiana Johnson Hall at the White House. No, wait, I got the wrong Tiana.
Stop name dropping, Michael. Stop name dropping. We can take that offline.
Okay, so but anyway, to go to the.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I want to let you know that I did put a placeholder in Century's agenda so that you can address us about that, and we can see if.
I'm sorry.
We've blown past the hour-and-a-half mark, and no one's given us the red flag yet. So I don't know whether we can just keep on going or what.
We got to be respectful.
I was sending in the chat that.
Yeah, we can wrap it. This has been rich.
I was looking for Janelle to go.
Hey, cut.
I was trying to do it subtly.
Hey, well, you know.
He said pass the plate, so I was like, okay, I know what that is.
No church is not over after collections, you know. There we go.
Right.
That's it, man. Time to go get some food. Well, thank you both, Danny and Michael. Much love to you, brothers, for carrying your torches. And I hope that we can actually push some dirt together. That would be a beautiful thing.
That will be.
I thank you for that as well. And I don't hope, I want us to do. Okay, I understand. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Will Wright again, and it is my honor to introduce the next speaker, who will be bringing us a wonderful conversation on the Bruce's Beaches case study. Joanna Hauser, AIA, is an associate architect at Page and Turnbull, a historic preservation firm with offices in LA, San Francisco, and San Jose. With over 10 years of experience, Joanna has a range of design work from small, painstaking residential reconstruction to large-scale institutional rehabilitation. Joanna is drawn to the most complex inner workings of the existing urban fabric, and as the ever-present call for environmental and social justice within Los Angeles region reaches a crescendo, she has joined the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee with AIA Los Angeles and SoCal NOMA. Joanna received a Master's of Architecture from University of Texas and a Bachelor of Arts in Comparative Literature from Bard College. It is my honor to introduce Joanna Hauser. Welcome, Joanna.
Thanks, Will. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm happy that you could stick it out to the end of Encompass. There's been a lot to listen to in the last 2 days. There's a lot of food for thought in that last panel. I want to thank Michael Anderson, Danny Bakewell Jr., and Stephen Lewis again for that wonderful conversation. And I hope everyone saved a little more room in your brain for more food for thought. I'm really excited about this conversation. As Will said, I'm vice chair of the J.E.D.I committee at AIALA this year, and I'll be moderating this last panel. So our tagline for Encompass this year is "From the Block to the Beach," which we thought really spoke to the vastness of the territory of Los Angeles and the huge array of communities that exist within it. I think already in our conference, we had a word cloud yesterday. A lot of people put in all the communities they were coming from. In the audience, we heard from Watts, Leimert Park, Chatsworth, Long Beach, Koreatown, San Pedro, downtown LA, Pasadena, Altadena. There were a lot more on there. So for our last panel, we're going to the beach. We're going to Bruce's Beach and Manhattan Beach in particular. And I saw we had some Manhattan Beach representation in the chat this morning. So I'm very excited to bring you all into the conversation. I hope we'll have some time for a discussion at the end of the panel. So as architects, we talk a lot about the built environment, and I think it's really obvious the built environment means buildings, but it really is everything that we build in order to live. So everything inside the buildings, the roads, the infrastructure outside the buildings, and also the land underneath the buildings and surrounding the buildings. And I think land is really the basic ingredient that makes all the rest of our built environment possible. So one of the things that came up when we met with the panelists before this conference is that you really can't be a people without land. So when Joshua Foster asked us all yesterday, what does community mean to you? I was really thinking about land and the value of owning land. At my office at Page & Turnbull, we mostly work on existing and historic buildings, so you really don't get a blank slate with the work you do. And we often talk about our projects as either preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, or reconstruction. So are we going to preserve what's currently there, restore or reconstruct what used to be there, or rehabilitate what remains for a new use? And lately I've been finding this framework helpful to think about the land beneath the buildings too, and which approach would lend itself to justice. So with land, you're really not dealing with a blank slate. You know, obviously there's a whole legacy of colonialization, and the way that land has changed hands over the years is often quite unjust. So how do we restore justice to the land is the question we're really asking today. And in every case, the answer is different. So today we're looking at Bruce's Beach as a case study because in many ways it looks like an unprecedented victory for restorative justice. As Stephen Lewis said in the last panel, it looks like a big tuna swimming towards us. I really like that analogy. A Black family was forced out of their community in the 1920s by racist white neighbors, and nearly a century later, the government gave their land back. But it's also a case study because what happened there is common and quite tragic. A Black family was forced out of their community. They died having lost their wealth. And for almost a century, this injustice was allowed to stand. And in a lot of ways, I think what was taken from them cannot really be returned. So I think it's important that we really see the whole picture of this and acknowledge the sadness and the loss of it, and also the inspiration and tools that we can take away when we leave today. So we're going to dig into the history of Bruce's Beach and then zoom out a bit and look at Black beach communities more broadly. And then we're going to have a bit of time to talk about restorative justice initiatives in LA County right now, what's happening with Bruce's Beach right now, and then hopefully have some time to talk about where we go from here. So I'd love to introduce and welcome our panelists if you are all ready to join me. Hi.
We're on, John.
Okay, so first we have Dr. Anthony Lee. He's a retired lecturer in African and African-American history at UCLA, who is now an independent scholar pursuing research on the African diaspora in the Indian Ocean world. He's also a poet and has published 5 volumes of poetry as a translator and author. He recently served on the Bruce's Beach task force appointed by the Manhattan Beach City Council and is currently a member of MB United, working for social justice and anti-racism in Manhattan Beach. We also have with us Chansla Al-Mansour, Executive Director of Housing Rights Center. Al-Mansour has extensive experience in fair housing advocacy. She has worked at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County, supervised homeless prevention work with LA City and LA County, and litigated hundreds of cases involving landlord-tenant, housing element, mortgage fraud, and fair housing laws. She was an attorney with the Western Center on Law and Poverty and served as president of the Fair Housing Congress of Southern California. And finally, we have Isela Gracian, who serves as Supervisor Holly Mitchell's Senior Deputy on Housing and Homelessness, leading the supervisor's housing, homelessness, and planning policy. She has over 2 decades of experience in grassroots community work. She served as the president of East LA Community Corporation, where she led policy campaigns, community wealth programs, and development of affordable housing. Isela is recognized as a leader in community-driven development, weaving together the intersections of housing, income generation, environmental justice, and culture. So very excited to have you all with us. I wanted to just start with you, Dr. Lee, if we could. I think you're going to be able to give us really great context. So first of all, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about yourself and your personal relationship to Bruce's Beach, but also if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of context on who the Bruces were, who the Bruce family was, and what their role was in the community.
Oh, thank you very much, Joanna. You can hear me all right?
Yes.
Right? You can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Yes, I'll try to be brief, though this is an issue which, as has been mentioned, is 100 years old, and it is a racial justice struggle which has gone on for 100 years and is still going on. And that tells us something about the nature of race relations in the United States. You know, going forward, we should be prepared for the next 100 years, actually. Manhattan Beach is virtually an all-white community. The Black population of Manhattan Beach is 0.5%. And the other 99.5% of the city's residents are almost all white. And this is not an accident. This isn't something that just happened. It was engineered 100 years ago and maintained over that entire period of time. And it's still being maintained, actually. The struggle for racial justice and really memory of this area goes on to this day. Even last week, the city council in Manhattan Beach refused to allow for any kind of celebrations or activities or permits for events in the Bruce's Beach Park, which is still standing. And there are groups of really, frankly, racist groups of citizens in Manhattan Beach who want to change the name of the park and erase the entire history of the Bruce family there. So my point is that this is an ongoing struggle and it will continue to be, and there are no easy fixes. Anyway, the history of Bruce's Beach begins really at the beginning of the 19th century. The 20th century, excuse me. Charles and Willa Bruce acquired property on the beachfront in the early 1900s after trying in several other places to acquire beach property and being refused. But in any case, they were able to buy lots on the beach. And in 1912, they opened a little resort which was open and welcome to Black people. Charles and Willa Bruce being Black themselves, of course. Now, the beaches in California at that time were segregated. Black or brown people, for that matter, were not welcome at any beach front property. There was, with the exception of Bruce's Beach and one other place in Santa Monica, which became known as the Inkwell. But this was a very important location for recreation and leisure for the entire Black community of Los Angeles, as well as all of Southern California. One person at an event held in Manhattan Beach celebrating the return of the Bruce's property mentioned that his parents or his grandparents he was Latino, Mexican descent, and his parents lived in San Diego. They looked forward to driving all the way from San Diego to Manhattan Beach simply to go to the beach and to enjoy a part of the day on the sand, because there was no other place from Manhattan Beach to the Mexican border where they could go and be safe. In any case, the Bruces developed this business, which was selling drinks and refreshments and providing places for people to change and renting bathing suits and so on. Eventually, it was extremely successful. They were able to build actually a little sort of guest house and a recreation center at the beach. And really every weekend, hundreds of Black and brown people came to their business to simply be able to go to the beach somewhere. And the business thrived. Now, this was before World War I. They opened in 1912 and remained open until 1924. So when the property was finally confiscated by the city, by eminent domain. But it was a segregated beach. And at that initial point, the residents of Manhattan Beach seemed to be okay with that, the white residents. Some of them were annoyed. Their property values, they were afraid were dropping, and there was some harassment, no trespassing signs and so on, put to discourage people from coming to the Bruce's Beach area, but nothing serious. The white residents seemed to be okay with excuse me, I'm sorry. Sorry, I have to get rid of the telephone. I didn't think of that. The white residents were okay with a segregated beach. And frankly, the black beachgoers were okay with that also. But after World War I, something changed. It became clear after the war that Black people were moving into northern cities. And it also became clear that Black people were going to claim their rights as citizens for full equality. Before the war, that just wasn't going to happen. That was just assumed. That was not on the agenda of American life. After World War I, it was, and suddenly the white residents of Manhattan Beach were no longer willing to have Blacks come to the beach. The other thing that had happened, which also alarmed the residents of the city, was that 4 or 5 other Black families had bought property in that area. And it was clear that a Black neighborhood was forming there around the beach. As a matter of fact, a small Black neighborhood had already formed. And that was also going to be unacceptable to the white residents. there was continued harassment. The Ku Klux Klan was very active in this part of the city during that period of time. Crosses were burned on the, outside of Black residents, and even some gunshots were fired and so on. But the Blacks were not going to move, and they just kind of held their ground. Finally, the city council of Manhattan Beach found a way of getting rid of the really ethnic cleansing for this area. And that was to, by eminent domain, declare that the entire land around Bruce's Beach, all of the Black properties, were needed for a city park. And by eminent domain and by the acts of the city council in 1924, the property was condemned, and took a few years because the Bruces did fight it in court. But finally, by 1927, the entire area was confiscated. And then they didn't build the park, of course, but that effectively got rid of the Black community in Manhattan Beach, and also of the Black resort area. So they didn't have to worry about dozens or hundreds sometimes of Black people coming into that part of the city, even though Manhattan Beach at that time was quite empty, and there were no white residents nearby, but just the idea was too much. Anyway, well, Manhattan Beach was actually kept as a white community for the next many decades, simply by restrictive covenants, which were written into the deeds, which would not allow any non-white buyer to buy any property with these covenants in it. As a matter of fact, my own family history connects here, because my grandfather in the 1930s bought some property in Manhattan Beach simply for investment, because it was cheap beach property and that was the thing to do, I guess. Anyway, he wanted to own land, of course. And 3 or 4 months after the purchase, he purchased the property, he was told that the sale was illegal because there was a restrictive covenant in the deed which would not allow any non-white person to buy the property. So he had to immediately sell or simply return the property. Well, fast forward to today, the name of the area that was confiscated for a park finally was built as a park 40 years later or so. After, let me see, I'm trying to be brief here. After the murder of George Floyd, there was a lot of racial turmoil. There were demonstrations in Manhattan Beach. And the city council felt compelled at that point to appoint a Bruce's Beach task force, which I was on, in order to recommend to the city steps that could be taken to sort of address these issues. The task force asked the city to come up with an apology, an official apology, and we made 22 recommendations to the city for racial justice, not only at the beach, but in all of Manhattan Beach. Well, that was very nice, but it didn't work. There was an election, more conservative members were elected to the city council, and very quickly our task force was dissolved and all of our recommendations were trashed. The city refused to apologize, though they did issue a sort of acknowledgement and condemnation of what had happened at the confiscation of the property at Bruce's Beach. Even that was controversial. There was this sort of hate group in Manhattan Beach that doesn't even want to acknowledge that. Now I'm going to leave out the return of the property to the Bruces and let Estela talk about that, which is the happy news, by the way, that the Bruces will eventually, though there are lawsuits and so on, receive, or the descendants of the Bruces will receive their property back. But there has been a much wider scope of damage which was done by these events historically. I'm a historian and I'm looking at the broad picture. This is not something that just happened in Manhattan Beach. During this period of time after World War I, this was happening all over the United States. It hasn't been documented very well, but Black families, Black businesses, and Black people were forced out of rural areas in the United States, out of suburbs and so on, into metropolitan areas as soon as it became clear that they were going to claim their rights as citizens. This involves massacres of Black people all over the country. Take Tulsa, for example, or Rosewood in Florida, where Black people were just violently attacked. But in hundreds and hundreds of towns, maybe there was only a single Black family that was simply told, you just have to go now. And they would have to move into a larger Black community in the city where they would be safer. This was going on in Manhattan Beach, where the residents were claiming a Negro invasion of the city, and that could not be tolerated. So there would have been a Black neighborhood in Manhattan Beach if things were allowed to take their course. As I said, the city is basically all white at this point. And by design, this is a very deliberate policy. Somebody's putting something in the chat that
Someone is eager to hear from our other speakers, and I thank you
yes,
so much,
I'm
Dr.
sorry.
No apologies necessary. We really loved hearing the context, and I think you actually were doing a great segue for Chancellor to kind of zoom out a little bit, and I believe she has some slides to share. Chancellor, let me know if you're able to.
Fantastic.
And we'll definitely hear from you again, Dr. Lee, so thank you. Are you able to share your screen, Chancellor?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Second, thank you, everybody. Hi, everybody. So while everything is being set up, my name is Chancellor Mansour. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Rights Center. We've been here in Los Angeles since 1968. We were originally the West Side Fair Housing Council. The first Fair Housing Council in Los Angeles was formed on the West Side, and it was because of all the discrimination that was happening, and particularly in the 1960s in Los Angeles, was happening everywhere in California, but and everywhere in Los Angeles, but in particular there. Sorry, my being slow for whatever reason, of course. Well, I may just have to run through the slides like this because the show is not, it's not fully showing. So I just want to tell a little bit about the Housing Rights Center. We were the nation's largest fair housing organization. We've been established since 1968, like I said. We provide free assistance to people in several different languages by phone. We're starting our walk-in services again. We have offices throughout LA County. We have offices in Van Nuys, in Koreatown, and in Pasadena. And we also do clinics and workshops throughout LA County. And the services that we provide are landlord-tenant counseling, outreach and public education. We also do discrimination complaint and investigation, where we send testers out. We survey testers, we survey other tenants and so forth to determine if there is discrimination happening in a particular building or in a property. And then we also litigate. We have housing attorneys on staff where we file affirmative fair housing cases. And we also have partnerships with the County of Los Angeles and the City of Los Angeles where we provide eviction defense, both in terms of actually representing tenants in court and also in terms of projects providing a rental assistance. We partner with the City and the County of Los Angeles to provide emergency rental assistance for the past 2 years, but we're also starting in new partnerships with the City and the County to provide additional rental assistance for tenants who are facing eviction. So we're very excited about these partnerships to try to prevent displacement, which obviously is a huge problem. So next, I'm just going to show you a few slides. The first one I'm going to talk about a little bit. So redlining, many of you in the last couple of years, I'm hoping that many of you have seen redlining slides. You've heard a little bit about redlining. I'm going to talk a bit about it just for a couple minutes, just in case you haven't heard about redlining, because it is so essential and so important to describe how we got here. And that is that there were many acts of discrimination, as Dr. Lee previously mentioned, and he was talking about times in the 1920s. By 1939, and it was after the Great Depression, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt with the New Deal decided that in order to prevent so many people from losing their homes, as what happened under the Depression, the US government was going to start backing mortgages, but in order to determine which mortgages to back and which neighborhoods to put US investments in, they were going to basically map neighborhoods throughout all of the United States. And map them and color code those maps to determine where it was theoretically safe to invest in mortgages. And these maps weren't just used for mortgages. They were initially by the Homeowners Home Loan Corporation, but then they were also used for sites for hospitals, for business development, for a lot of different investments. And as a matter of fact, we've seen the impacts even during COVID-19, because is oftentimes in these communities where there are so few services and hospitals and infrastructure and support. And it was all going back to how it was determined back in the 1930s where these investments should be. So this is the Los Angeles map. And over
Possible, your slides are not advancing. We're still seeing the first slide.
Oh, you are. Oh, that's weird. Okay. Well, of course. Of course you are. You're seeing the first slide. That's what happens. Okay, I'm seeing them, but you're not. So let me just try one more thing. Let's see if that works. I don't know why you're not seeing them. I am.
Chancellor, do you want to email me? I can try from my end.
I shared my screen.
Yes, you are sharing.
So, but you're only seeing the first slide.
Yep.
It's really weird.
Or you can take it down and reshare.
Yeah, let me just, I'm sorry, just one quick second. Let me see if I can do this in 10 seconds or less.
Chancellor, are you using a PDF or a PowerPoint? Because I've encountered this with PDFs. What other people are seeing on the screen aren't the same as the page of the PDF. Are you using a PowerPoint or a PDF?
I'm using my PowerPoint, so I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I'm using a PowerPoint. That's what I always do. So I'm not sharing anymore, right?
No.
No.
Let me try again. Well, I hate to just have to talk about it. I had some great slides. and you really do have to see the redlining slides in order to really appreciate them. So as long as I'm well, I'll just have to continue talking as I try to do two things at once. So the redlining maps were color coded with basically green being the best in terms of the neighborhood that it would be okay to live in and to invest in and so forth, and all the way through the neighborhoods that were redlined, literally redlined, to be determined that they were not safe for investments. And so and if you were to see the map, and the really interesting part about the map for this area, for Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, and Los Angeles, is that the beachfront communities were never the place where people of wealth and means wanted to live. It was truly the vacation places. The beachfront communities were industrial workforce communities, bungalows, and so forth. And also it was where people of color, in particular, Blacks and Latinos, could live because they could be there to work the summer resorts and that type of thing. And so if you look at the maps and so forth, the really interesting parts about it is that you see that most of the beachfront communities are actually redlined or yellow lined. They're not considered to be like the best places to go. And it is really because of that situation. It is really interesting. I didn't really think about it until Dr. Lee said it was 100 years ago. That yes, 100 years ago in 1922, at that time, it wasn't just the Bruce family that was trying to develop property in the beachfront communities in California. In Santa Monica, there was an investment group led by Houston and Charles S. Darden. They were attorneys in the Black investment group, and they wanted to start a very upscale first-class Black resort, right where Shutter's Hotel is today. And in Santa Monica, a group formed called the Santa Monica Bay Protective League in 1922, 100 years ago today, to block this effort of this development from happening. And they were successful in doing so. This development would have, the reason why this location was so prime for the Black community in Santa Monica is because it was just not too far away from Phillips Chapel Christian Episcopal Church, which was established in 1905. It was the first Black church in Santa Monica. So there was a really thriving Black community in Santa Monica that was really hoping to develop. But unfortunately, because of the extreme racial violence that occurred, and it wasn't just like Manhattan Beach and these cities saying you couldn't develop it. The Ku Klux Klan was very much involved and was very much part of with the white homeowners committees. They would set up barricades, slash tires, and things like that anytime Blacks would even try to visit the beaches and the beach communities. And so there really was this kind of really active effort of violence against them. There was one part during this time in the 1920s where Blacks were allowed to go, and it was a part of what is now considered the Bay Street area. It was used, a very derogatory term was used for that beach area. It was called the Inkwell beach area, very derogatory for obvious reasons. And actually Inkwell is not a term that was just used in Los Angeles. It was used in beachfronts on the other coast as well. Basically, it was like the only little small part of land where they were allowed to swim and so forth. But even that was really limited. And even to this day, for many people in this meeting, if you've grown up in Los Angeles or in California and you are Black, you probably have known or experienced situations in which you know there are certain beaches that you're welcome and not welcome, or where there may be stronger police presence and so forth. And so that's one way in which they kind of restricted ways in which Blacks could enjoy the beach. And then something also very rudimentary as dogs, having the police using dogs to go to certain beach areas and so forth to kind of make people feel unwelcome, and basically really to restrict Black home ownership. And then the other major thing that happened on top of the violence against Black communities, on top of the violence against Black beachgoers everywhere from Santa Monica to Manhattan Beach, to Hermosa Beach and Long Beach, was you have the development of our freeway system. And so in the United States, but in particular in Southern California, the growth of our freeways what has really accelerated and exacerbated displacement, if not just taking of Black lands. So in 1957, when the Santa Monica Freeway was developed, that really kind of cut through the Black community that was established in Santa Monica, displacing thousands of Black families that lived in that area, many of whom their homes were taken by eminent domain, and many of whom moved to Inglewood, or they moved to the San Fernando Valley, where the only place where they could really go in the San Fernando Valley at that time, which was the Pacoima area and the eastern part of, northern part of San Fernando Valley. And so to this day, you really, there have been many, especially since George Floyd in the last couple of years, there have been revivals and many different things that have happened to try to show well, try to observe that there was a Black presence in that area. In 2008, there's a commemorative plaque that was placed at the Bay Street kind of memorial, I guess I want to call it. And it says on it, a place for celebration and pain on that plaque that is still there today that you can see, because it's in recognition of the fact that they're, going to the beach is a time of celebration, but it also is a great time of pain for the Black community as well. I guess I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about why this is so important. It's not just the fact that, beachfront communities were taken and properties were taken and so forth, but, it really is greater than that in terms of what we see. And I'm sorry, can somebody tell me if they can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, because I can't see my screen. So you may have to give me a verbal cue when my time is up. So just today, well, if you even look at in the United States, farmland, it's estimated that if you look at Black farmland that has been taken, that the economic value of that Black farmland is probably worth over $300 billion. And that's just Black farmland that was taken throughout the United States. Coastal land and so forth, as I said before, there were Blacks that did live in coastal properties and so forth, but there wasn't so much home ownership. So if you really look for, or land ownership for records of it, you're probably not going to find it as much. But there were families other than the Bruces that did own property as well. It's just that unfortunately for them, their property, after it was taken by eminent domain and so forth, it didn't remain with a government agency or something like that. Like the county, it has been divided, sold many times over, many purchases, statute of limitations has run. So there's no way to kind of effectively and legally return property or land back. But we see that the effects of it today. 72, a recent study just showed that nationally, 72% of all white households are homeowners. Nationally, only 42% of Black households are homeowners. In Los Angeles, it's closer to 27% of all Black homeowners, households are homeowners. And that number has gone down since the COVID-19 pandemic for many different reasons. And COVID-19 actually affected the homeownership of Black and Latino families, because oftentimes the bread owners in a multi-generational family were the ones who were affected and lost their jobs or lost their lives or lost their health due to COVID-19 and aren't able to contribute to the mortgages and so forth in their households. So we're really seeing that impact on Black homeownership. I want to cite just a couple of people if you wanted to do any more research or all this on these topics, because we're just lightly talking about Bruce Beach and so forth. There is an activist, Kavon Ward, who in her, she has a website, Where Is My Land, and her work, not just with the Bruce family, but also nationally to try to help Black families and Black households and other groups as well, and other national ethnic groups as well, reclaim their lost properties. So please, I would encourage you to go to Where Is My Land. There has also been the writings of Allison Rose Jefferson, who's written many times about the loss of Black home ownership and loss of Black lands in Santa Monica area as well. So I guess the other thing I just really quickly before I leave is just that what we still see to this day is the chilling effect in terms of whether or not you feel welcome in a certain community. And as somebody who's been looking at housing discrimination, looking at segregation, looking at how neighborhoods have formed in my career over the past 30 years in Los Angeles, you know, that I had to take a kind of a sigh because it's definitely not getting better. It's only getting worse. And also what I really see is that there's a direct impact on everything. So when you look at those people who are unhoused or people who are facing homelessness in Los Angeles, 40% of whom are Black, even though Black persons only represent 7 to 8% of the population of Los Angeles. A lot of that's directly related to the loss of Black homes and displacement. When grandmother or Big Mama loses her home and so forth, then that really affects other family members as well. They don't have that safe landing place to go if they are evicted, if they are released from foster care or incarceration or something like that. There's not that place to go. So that generational wealth is never allowed to accumulate. And if anything, it just ends very poorly, very quickly. And so until you really talk about increasing Black homeownership again, until you really talk about really looking at racial wealth, the racial wealth gap and disparities, we're not really going to tackle issues such as homelessness and economic disparities and other sources and so forth. It really does go back off to home ownership and to just the safety and the security that a family can have. So the one thing I always tell Black families, always end with, and other families as well in Los Angeles, is if you can, do not sell your homes. So I just want to end on that. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of so forth to sell your homes and so forth, but I try to just to encourage you, if you can think of other means to try to benefit from the equity that you may have gained in your home, if you can try to get family members together and try to talk with financial planners and so forth. I really try to encourage families to do this as well, because if you've lived here in Los Angeles, you've seen just too many people sell their homes and never be able to afford to buy or come back. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Chancellor, and I appreciate you bringing, highlighting some of the players and the kind of story that have really at least enlightened me about what's happened at Bruce's Beach. And I did want to give another plug for Allison Rose Jefferson. Her book, Living the California Dream, has been very eye-opening for me. And I just read today that they're actually optioning the book as background for there's an Amazon series being developed about Bruce's Beach now. So that was news to me, but it's a really incredible book. So I put it in the chat there. And also Kavon Ward, I've been really following her work, and also put her website there in the chat as well. And Isela, really appreciate your patience. Thank you for sticking with us here. We'd love to hear from you. If you could just give us a little bit of an update about from the county side, what's happening with the land right now. And you know, I was reading about the county's anti-racism diversity and inclusion initiative, and I saw that Bruce's Beach was kind of framed as one of those initiatives. So I'd love to just get a little bit more context about what that is and how the Bruce's Beach effort kind of fits into the larger vision of the county.
Yeah, thank you, and pleasure to be here with everybody. I'm gonna try to be brief. One, I have a hard stop at 12, but also in these sessions, I appreciate hearing from audience members and being able to be in discussion and conversation. So so I'll give high level, and then folks can either ask questions or even reach out to me separately. We can have a conversation. So the Bruce's Beach return of land, you know, was initiated by Supervisor Hahn. And my boss, Supervisor Holly Mitchell, was co-author on those motions. And with redistricting, now Manhattan Beach, along with quite a few other beach cities, are part of our district, the 2nd district of LA County. So there's a lot of legal details that are in conversation with the family. So on that end, I do need to stay high level with you all on that front, because we're working that out. So where we are is that we just closed the timeline for an open call on the legal potential legal heirs to the property. So it's part of like that process. And once that gets finalized, we'll be able to move on to the next step, which is finalizing the agreement with the family, and then we might have a couple more board actions that we need to do to be able to do that agreement and then officially transfer the land. There is an active lawsuit from a resident of Manhattan Beach challenging the county's ability to transfer the land. And we're not sure when that will be completely resolved. We are tracking that and hopefully benchmark items that either will help shorten the time of the transfer to the legal heirs of the Bruce's family or potentially might extend the timeline. So on a very optimistic and aggressive timeline from today, it could be like 2 to 3 months. On a more extended timeline, it could be a few more months after that. It'll really depend on what we hear back on that lawsuit and where we're at in conversations with the family. For Supervisor Mitchell, it's been very important that the family is fully aware of all of the responsibilities and ownership of the land, that we minimize any hardships around like the taxes, property taxes, and their ability to sustain the land longer term, and then just what different options they might have. So that's generally where we're at with the land transfer. So again, on a very optimistic and aggressive timeline, 2 to 3 months. That's what on the county side and the family side we're working towards. But depending on the legal landscape, that might get extended. And, you know, for the county's anti-racism, diversity, and inclusion initiative, RD is how we refer to it. We're really have goals across all of the policy areas, and you know, equity for Supervisor Mitchell is equitable resource distribution, looking at how we can repair harm that has been caused by past policies, and going forward, how do we create policies that will not create harm, right? So for us, the land is part of being able to tackle that piece of repairing harm. And as I think it was Chancellor that mentioned, and also Dr. Lee, about existing laws. So for better or worse, we are, although we are government, there's still laws that we need to operate under, right? So Bruce's Beach, because the county had ownership, because we were able to find those legal venues or avenues to be able to return the land, we were able to leverage that. But as somebody mentioned in the previous panel, you know, as a country, we are a capital society, whether we agree with that or not. And our Constitution does prioritize land rights over a lot of other rights. So as we continue to work on this land transfer, we will be doing an assessment of what kind of, you know, could we do this in other settings? What would it take to be able to do that, and hopefully be able to uplift a county-wide policy around land, and any land that could potentially fall in a similar situation to Bruce's Beach. And I'll just say a couple more comments, and then I'll pause so we can get questions. I think important for this conversation and for the group is that, you know, the campaign around land back or return of land is not new, right? Our Native American relatives have been in this fight and struggle for hundreds of years. And I think for the county and for my boss and for me, we are looking at, you know, for our Native American residents and tribes within the county, like, what does it mean for them? And, you know, for generally broad strokes, for Native American sovereignty, the piece around land is around stewardship, and ownership is not necessarily the concept that drives that lane of land back. And when we're talking about within Black liberation, we are talking about ownership and in the current framework of ownership and generating capital and wealth through land. And that is something that we, for those folks interested in supporting of closing the harm, repairing the harm, we need to grapple with those tensions, right? The tension between the framework of ownership as it relates to capital and dollars, and how that is centered, how wealth building centers on that, and what it means to have stewardship in a different connection to land, and what is government's role to be able to really satisfy the needs of ourselves and our constituents in a way that may not rely on property ownership to create that wealth and satisfy the needs, whether that is around retirement or education or health and medical. So I put that out there as a challenge for us to continue to think and grapple around that, on how we create a collective vision around the whole spectrum of land back for Black and Brown communities in LA County and contribute to that conversation.
Really well put. And I was very much hoping that we could talk about the intersection between the Indigenous land back movement and Black liberation. I think that's a very interesting conversation. I would love to have another 2 hours to talk about. I do want to open up the conversation for everyone to ask their own questions, but I just want to start off with one, and I think Isela, you're kind of getting at this, but the question that I just keep having is what conditions made this particular case possible, and is it replicable and scalable? And I think some of that has been answered, but if any of you would like to speak to that a little bit further, I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, maybe I can start off, and definitely would love to hear perspectives on this one as we're going to continue to think about how what could be included in a policy for the county around this. So one, definitely that it is a parcel that is owned by the county. That was very critical in this situation. That we have enough historical documents and support to demonstrate that it was a racially charged taking of the land, and that we have enough documents and materials to be able to connect to the legal errors of the Bruce's family. So those would be, for me, the three kind of key things at this point that I would uplift, but would love, Luckily, you've been involved in the conversation, and Chancellor, you've been studying about it. So would love to hear if there's any additional points that you would contribute to that.
I think it was the preservation of the history of the area that made it possible for there to be enough consciousness of the racially motivated confiscation of land. And particularly, we should mention Robert Brigham's master's thesis in the 1960s, which brought the whole history of the area into consciousness. Otherwise, it simply would have been forgotten. And once the history is forgotten, it's, it's very difficult to revive it. If there's no memory of the land ownership, then it just is lost.
I just want to say thank you also for somebody for putting in the chat the story about Nicholas Gabaldon. I actually had a picture of him in my PowerPoint. He passed away at the age of 24 as a surfer. He was Mexican and of Mexican and Black descent. He was trying to do a very dangerous surfing dive off the Malibu pier, and then unfortunately died. But he's definitely a legend. I want to thank somebody for putting that in the chat. So, you know, with Bruce Beach, as I said a little bit earlier, a lot of things kind of worked out. And one of the main things is that that piece of land is still intact. That's very unusual and very unheard of, that would have still happened, that land was not developed, and it was only developed for other reasons that had nothing to do with the Bruce family and all this, but it had to do with LA County. It did have to do actually some degree with disputes about what should happen with that land. It was made into like a county station for a while. And if you've ever been there, you know, it's mostly grass and so forth. So it just so happened it wasn't split up and wasn't sold into different parcels and subdivided. And there haven't been like 100 years of bona fide land purchasers, which would have made it much more difficult. The other thing that really helped is they were really wealthy. You know, they weren't poor Black people. So that helped a great deal. They had, you know, their pictures, there's a lot of documents, a lot of evidence to prove that they own this property, that they had means, that they had wealth. As I was saying earlier with Black farmers, that's often not the case. Many times Black people who own their properties were barely literate. So they didn't even understand deeds or the titles of what they owned. They sold things that they didn't know that they were selling. They may have sold or given away, for example, the rights to the timber or the minerals and all this off their land. And that's my family story in Arkansas, with all the timber from our family land being taken and so forth. And that's a very common story with Black families from the South, which most Black families have originally from the South. So it's just, I think one of the main things is that the land was not subdivided, and the Bruces, even though they were the victims of atrocious discrimination, were still of means.
We got a question in the chat. Dr. Lee, could you repeat the author's name of the thesis in the 60s?
Oh, yes, Robert Brigham. I don't remember the title of his thesis.
He was from Fresno, or?
Well, he lived in and grew up in Manhattan Beach, and he had a memory of this area, but he did his master's thesis on Negro land ownership in the South Bay or something. But he did the original research on this. There is also the Manhattan Beach City website. What is it? mbcity.info. That has the history that was done by the Bruce's Beach Task Force up on the website. We were able to get that history approved and pushed through before the big change and before we were dissolved. And that has a full bibliography of the history of the area.
And I just put a New Yorker article in the chat that also talks about Robert Brigham. So
oh, good.
He's listed there as well. I think the person who wrote that was a personal friend of his. So
yes, he's since passed away, but bless his soul, because it was through his academic work that the history of the area came back to life.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to open it up if anyone in the audience has a question, if you want to turn your camera on and speak to us, or if you want to put it in the chat. Have some time for questions.
Comments and impressions are also welcome.
I'll just ask another one then while people are getting warmed up. And we did talk about this when we were all kind of meeting before, but kind of talking about the idea of being made whole and this idea of restitution or reparation and what are we trying to get at when we talk about that? And I know you kind of said, well, it's not possible, but what would be, how do we talk about that, I guess? Something that
Well, it's difficult to talk about. Of course, the idea of reparations is extremely noble and important, and the idea of restorative justice, that people who are wrong should have some kind of restitution. But controversially, I suppose, I am a historian. I would say history cannot be repaired. There's no way we can go back or do anything now that would repair the 100 years of damage that has been done by just the Bruce's Beach incident example. What we can do is go forward into the future and try to create a just society and to work for what we are doing for equity, for social justice, for diversity, for inclusion, and create in going forward a society that we would regard as just. So for me, reparations is not about the past. It is colored by the past, but reparations are really about the future and what kind of future we want to create for ourselves. Not to go on and on, though I always do, that how do we restore Black presence to Manhattan Beach, for instance? Well, you know, that's a 100-year project. And one of the things I did is that I had since I'm retired as a college professor now, I had a very large collection of books of African and African-American history, about 1,200 books, which I've given to the Manhattan Beach Public Library, which thankfully is a county library. And we're calling it the Bruce's Beach Memorial Collection of African and African-American history. And the county is supporting this. And hopefully it will attract Black scholars and those who are interested to the library and provide a memorial to the Bruces. But as I said, that doesn't repair anything. That simply creates a library that we would like to see in the future.
Yeah, and I concur with Dr. Lee on this, and I think that currently for the county, what we're looking at and the conversations around racial equity and ARNI and targeting like resources for folks, you know, the motion and program that my boss Supervisor Mitchell moved on guaranteed basic income, the BREATHE program, for those of you on the call, the application's open March 31st. We're getting tons of interest around that. It's really about getting people to the same starting line at this point, right? And I think for us and our team, we're even thinking like, well, how do we shift the whole playing field, right? We usually think about how do we get everybody to the same playing field, but our current field will always leave somebody behind that line. It's the way the system is, it's not set up for everyone to thrive. As much as we want to believe that in this country, that is not the reality. And so I'll bring in the questions that are on here in relation to that. So other pieces or parcels of land, currently we don't have any that are in this process. Through this process with Bruce's Beach, there might be others that come up that we would need to assess and see what makes it there. And in regards to our Indigenous people and communities, I think that's where we get into the space of thinking about what a different playing field would look like when it comes to reparations and when it comes to what society going forward could look like that really and genuinely and authentically provides the opportunity for everyone to thrive, right? But right now, it is about like the going forward and trying to get as many people to that same line. Conversation here around, you know, building and ownership and wealth. We know that folks that don't own their own home start way behind on that line, right? During the foreclosure crisis for Black and Brown communities, it wiped out anywhere between 3 to 8 generations of wealth, right? And that's going to take a long time. And even before the foreclosure crisis, we were already 2 to 3 generations out from being able to get to a place of ownership, of home ownership, specifically single family home ownership. So I'll pause there.
I agree with everything that was said. Just kind of looking back at what kind of worked or what kind of motivated things, bringing on economic opportunities for definitely was a driving factor for the Black migration in general. Just, you know, so if when you look at Santa Monica, you look at the Santa Monica airport and the Douglas aircraft and how that brought thousands of jobs for Blacks to Santa Monica and kind of led to more Blacks moving to Santa Monica back when they could. They're in the shipyards in World War II, and obviously, you know, that was a main driving factor for Oakland and Alameda and the San Francisco and the Long Beach area as well for Black migration. But so all these stem down to job opportunities. But the one thing that we've really seen, unfortunately, it's worse now than it was back in the 1960s in terms of a lot of, especially young Black people not being prepared for job opportunities. And all this because of the lack of educational opportunities, or because they were maybe discriminated against or targeted or were unfairly disciplined in school and so forth. So they don't have the keys and they don't have the tools of financial literacy, of just simple things such as, you know, entering into a lease agreement and paying rent on time and that type of thing. So I just want to say that if we're going to talk about reparations, you know, and so forth, it's really an investment is how I look at it more so than necessarily reparations. I agree with Dr. Lee. I think that's a bit of a misnomer because it really is saying that these communities, indigenous communities, other communities that have been impacted by systemic discrimination in this country really are worth investing in. And as Americans, they're worth investing in. And so that's the mindset that I look at this.
Anyone else have a question in the audience? We have about 10 minutes left. I did want to give each of you a chance to just kind of give us a closing thought if you had something that you wanted to say to kind of round us out. Chancellor, do you want to start?
Just really quickly, there are other Black homeownership efforts in San Diego. The San Diego City Council is working towards with funds to try to, as I said, as I was kind of talking about before, put people in this situation where they can be homeowners or be in the situation or in a position to purchase homes. So there's a lot of effort, or again, in terms of HUD counselors, in terms of just financial literacy and so forth. So in the other earlier panel, somebody mentioned being part of neighborhood housing services. They do financial literacy. There's other organizations as well that in LA that do, but I really stress that that's really important.
Yeah, I would like to stress that soon we're going to celebrate the return of property to the Bruce family, and I will be there dancing my head off. But the struggle is not over at that point, and the struggle for racial justice, it took 100 years to even get us to this point. And I just want to emphasize it's going to take another 100 years for us to make the kind of progress that we are talking about right now. And as much as I will shout and scream at the celebration of the Bruce family, we know that that's not the whole struggle, that the struggle for social justice and racial justice is going to go on. We have very powerful enemies that we came up against, and they continue to be powerful.
Yeah, Thank you for that reminder, Dr. Lee. Yeah, this is sometimes folks, we might feel that this is the end point when it becomes just a point on the journey. So I agree with that. And I think for folks, particularly architects here in this, would like to uplift something that was shared around like what made this possible, and that history and that learning. And I know for many architects, as you're thinking about sites and looking at imagining what could be there, you do some historical research on that. So if in those projects you find something that's related to what we're talking about today within the county, would love to have you all share that with me. I'll drop my email in the chat for those of you that don't have it, or you can get it off our Supervisor Mitchell's website also. And then I think lastly for Supervisor Mitchell, again, we see this as one point in the journey of creating and getting the county to be a place where everybody can thrive, and where we celebrate Black communities, we celebrate all of our different communities, and really getting to a place where there is a collective sense of belonging. And policies are very tactical, and sometimes our policies are created based on the momentum that's existing in the county, and sometimes they're aspirational, and it's to impact the momentum that is happening or could happen in the county. So I just would, we tend to hear a lot around like complaints, but would also love to hear, especially from this group, any ideation, ideas that continue to move the line more and more on the creativity, on getting to that place of all of us truly feeling that sense of belonging, no matter which community we're walking through or living in the county.
Thank you so much, all of you. Really enjoyed this conversation. And I think, Carmen, do we have a closing statement from you?
We do. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our sponsors. Special thanks to the AIA staff who worked with the J.E.D.I committee to put this program together. If you've enjoyed the program, please consider joining us in the J.E.D.I committee to start planning next year's. We hope to see you all again. And yes, we are planning to be in person if all goes well next year. So we get to do this in a in-person format next year. And yeah, that's a wrap for the 2022 Encompass conference. Thank you, everyone.